Hey, Daddy, this is the man of the champions, Bill Fonzie Alfonso, giving a shout out to
Something else.
something else, Daddy.
This is Nicole Matara, Great Warrior Wolf, and you are listening to Something Else.
I'm Tony Cini, and you're listening to Something Else.
Hey everybody, it's Rich Palladino, the voice of New England, and you are listening to Something Else with Aria.
Welcome. It's episode number 166 of Something Else. Feast your hair holes on this week's episode as we take a look at NWA Total Nonstop Action from February 12th, 2003. My name is Aria, and joining me, as always, is the Steve Chamberlain to my Zach Gowen. It's Trey. Wow, I really fucked up there. It's actually Cindy.
Yes,
Cindy's here,
you
not Trey.
did.
Wow.
That's right.
Sorry, Cindy.
I'm not the wrong one-legged wrestler.
Wow, I really fucked up that time.
Well,
Oh,
if you want to get
Lord.
Trey to do this episode, fine. I'll take a break. Have Trey do this.
Oh, goddamn. I'll say poor you, not poor Trey, because, Trey, it's a different vibe. I think him and I would probably end up being dead of alcohol poisoning if we were to do these episodes.
Hmm.
You keep my liver in check. So,
I do that
yeah,
with a lot of people.
Steve Chamberlain is the answer to the trivia question. What's the name of the wrong one-legged wrestler? The one that Johnny Ace signed when Vince told him to go sign the one-legged guy. And that's actually what happened this week. This week in the Wrestling Observer was actually a couple days after this show, Johnny Ace signed the right one-legged wrestler, Zach Gowen. Turns out TNA had put him on the show 3 times without bothering to try to sign him, and they gave him a contract at the end of this episode when he was leaving. But by this point, he either knew that WWE was going to reach out or WWE had already reached out, and that's what happened here. He signed a 3-year deal with WWE after Johnny Ace signed the wrong guy. For once, I'm going to give a little bit of credit here to Johnny Ace because what happened essentially was Paul Heyman knows what the hell's going on, so Paul Heyman told Vince to sign the one-legged guy, and Vince had no idea who the hell it was, so he tells Johnny Ace to go sign the one-legged guy, and Johnny Ace knew even less about it than Vince, so he called around a few contacts, and they told him about this guy training in Florida who only had one leg, whose name is Steve Chamberlain, and he is much bigger in every way than Zach Gowen. And actually, if you picture a WWE version of a one-legged wrestler, it'd be closer to this guy than Zach Gowen, but this guy also, I don't even think he'd had a match yet. So how the hell they even found out about it is beyond me. But anyway, that's what happened here, where Johnny Ace, doing his best to do what Vince told him to do, well, he fucked up.
Mhm.
And let this be like the only time I will ever defend Johnny Ace about anything on this show. But yeah, that's what happened here. Now we're gonna go through this show and we're gonna discover that while this is not a great show by any stretch of the imagination, it is certainly a better show than we've had the last few weeks. And you might think that's a wacky coincidence, Cindy. In fact, Cindy, I'm going to say your name, Cindy, about 8 million times, Cindy, to make up for the fact, Cindy, that I called you the wrong name, Cindy. But anywho, the reason why, well, part of the reason maybe why that everyone had their working boots on, both in front of and behind the camera, is that the boss was here. Bob Carter was at the show, And apparently after the show, he went out with Vince Russo's clique. And I'm sure it will not surprise you to hear that Vince Russo's power is growing backstage.
Not shocked.
And then, yes, and then in some WWE news that's going to affect us, D'Lo Brown has been informed that when his contract is up on March 1st, that WWE is not going to re-sign him. And D'Lo lucked out because he was one of those guys that he got a good contract during the Attitude Era. He's actually a lot like Perry Saturn. He got a good contract at the right time, and then Vince gave up on him pretty much immediately, but he still kept the contract for 3 years. And so that's basically what happened here. And D'Lo is, spoiler alert, D'Lo is on his way in, and that is a good thing. You know, because when it comes to former WWE guys, D'Lo is one of them that has a chip on his shoulder and has something to prove, which is a fucking good thing. Let's just say that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so this is not a great week for this show. On yesterday's show, Trey and I talked about the death of David Von Erich. And keep in mind, we're recording this a week before I record the show about David Von Erich. But I'm pretty sure Trey and I are going to have a pretty good discussion about the death of David Von Erich, because that happens. This week on TNA, death has to continue, apparently. Death comes in twos on this podcast, because the show starts with a 10-bell salute for Curt Hennig, who passed away on February 10th. Actually, weirdly enough, not only did he die on February 10th, he died 19 years to the day that David Von Erich died, which is just crazy considering, that we talk about both these shows here. Now, obviously, Curt Hennig's legacy was not ruined by his TNA run, but I guarantee that if he was able to see the future and knew that he was close to death, he would not have wanted his last match ever to be that 2-minute axe handle on a pole match with David Flair, where he decided he didn't even want to climb the damn pole at the end. But yeah, anything you want to say about Curt Hennig? I know his TNA run was kind of brief. He didn't do a whole hell of a lot here. I mean, he had some decent matches with like Ron Killings, and he had a tag title match at one point, and he wrestled Jarrett. But it was not his best work. And also it was obvious he was trying to get the internet to buzz about him wanting to wrestle Brock Lesnar. But that was probably never going to happen. But
no.
Yeah.
Got too soon. And a lot of the demons kind of came at the forefront during this run, because not a lot of checks and balances were going on in this company yet. But I've liked to see more of Curt Hennig in TNA, just to probably wash the stench out of that one match.
Yeah.
But
it's like, I bet him and Jerry Lynn probably would have had a really fun match.
Oh, yeah.
And I know we keep mentioning Jerry Lynn anytime we need to have somebody have a good match, but hey, the best matches in this company's history have pretty much all involved Jerry Lynn.
At this point, yeah.
So, and part of it too, it's like he wasn't here for very long, but he made some good friends, because him and Chris Harris especially got really close there. And we're going to see, because Chris Harris is going to do a perfect plex on this show. That was it hurt him, that happened. But yeah. So we then go to a video which recaps the crappy brawl at the end of last week's show, which then ended with some footage that we did not see. SEX got a 9-on-1 advantage, and for once, Jeff Jarrett did not single-handedly destroy the entire heel faction. and the heels got the advantage. They tied Jeff Jarrett to the posts, and they whipped him like a dog. And he had welts on his back, he had bruises, all this stuff. We're informed he's not going to be here this week, and of course, every human being knew what that really meant. But yeah, so Jarrett took quite the beating, and we then get the usual opening video package. We come to the ring where, as we mentioned last week, Bullet Bob is gone. No more Bullet Bob Armstrong. We're informed that he's taken a leave of absence. Now, do you remember what happened to the last person we were told was taking a leave of absence on this show?
Yeah, Steamboat.
What was that?
Wasn't it Steamboat?
No, it was Ed Ferrara.
Oh,
He went on assignment last August, and much like Bullet Bob Armstrong, it's 2025, and we're still waiting for Ed Ferrara to come back. And sadly, Bullet Bob passed away in 2020, and Bullet Bob is never coming back. Um, so anyway, what did you think about the Jeff Jarrett angle? You know, the whipping him with a belt angle.
it's like he got the belt back, but it came at a price.
Oh yeah, that was the other thing. Somehow, despite the fact that he got his ass kicked in this post-match angle, he somehow got his fucking belt back. Much like how the hell did AJ Styles get it back last week? How the hell did Jeff Jarrett end up with the fucking belt? However, I would go as far as to say, why the hell didn't they just do this on the pay-per-view? Like this was not like, oh, they just accidentally ran out of time. No, this was the planned finish of last week's pay-per-view, was to go off the air and do a cliffhanger, except it wasn't really much of a cliffhanger. It was just like, okay, it's Jeff Jarrett, now we're off the air. So instead we saw a shitty 10-minute brawl when you literally could have just had that fucking main event last week that ended in a double pin draw, do something where like everybody runs down to attack the new church, and then it ends up one of them is Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett gets 10 seconds of offense in before getting cut down and then whipped like a dog. That would have meant more for this week's show than the mysterious angle where he just tackled Vince Russo to the ground when the show went off the air.
Yep.
But hey, we don't need these guys to try to make money, do we?
Nah.
So the NWA searched high and low for Bull Bob Armstrong's replacement, and of all the people they could find, they found J.J. Dillon. Because J.J. Dillon, I get the whole fucking point of this was so that Russo could do his shoot promo on another person who wronged him, but nobody gives a fuck. Like J.J. Dillon was the WCW authority figure for like 3 or 4 years, and it's like he was incompetent. Nobody cared. Like, with all due love and respect to J.J. Dillon, nobody cared about fucking J.J. Dillon in WCW. But oh well, because he had that. The inside wrestling fans knew that Vince Russo and J.J. Dillon didn't like each other, so we had to bring J.J. Dillon in for this angle here, where he went and talked about how when he worked for the WWF, and he decided to leave, he was a man and went to Vince McMahon's office and handed in a letter of resignation. But Vince Russo, he waited until the day of a TV shoot to call Vince McMahon on the phone and quit. And Vince Russo, by the way, came to the ring and was yawning and laying on the ground and all this fucking shit. And Russo, of course, talked about how J.J. Dillon sold WCW a bill of goods when they hired him, and he couldn't bring anything to the table. Basically, Vince Russo took everything people said about him and said it about J.J. Dillon, which is just hilarious. And J.J. Dillon tried cutting a Jim Cornette promo, but all due love and respect to J.J. Dillon, on his best day, he couldn't cut a Jim Cornette promo on Vince Russo or pretty much anybody for that matter.
No, he needed to cut his style of promo, and he couldn't do it.
And then because the obscene randomness of this show, we're just getting started with the weird fucking randomness of TNA. Because we had Nikita Koloff come out last month, and of course he's been gone for 2 or 3 weeks now. And we had the Rock and Roll Express come out the 1 week. We had Tony Schiavone come out the 1 week. TNA is entering their period here where money is being spent to do one-offs and two-off appearances of the most random ass people you've ever thought of to appear in this company. And so when this angle comes to an end, Vince Russo's in the ring and he sends Ron and Don Harris up the ramp to go after J.J. Dillon. Well, somebody has to make the save for J.J. Dillon. Now, this is the NWA, this is TNA. We've seen dozens, maybe not dozens, we've seen, a dozen baby faces over the last few months that all stand up. They stand up for the NWA. Jerry Lynn, Ron Killings, America's Most Wanted, Amazing Red, Kid Cash, the Disciples of the New Church, all these people who are against SEX that are the first people that come to your mind. You think, okay, they're going to come out and help J.J. Dillon, a 60-something-year-old man at this point. And it's hard to remember JJ's age because he's always looked like an old man, even when he wasn't an old man. But anyway, who makes the save for J.J. Dillon? The most... I could sit here and give you, the audience, I could press pause on this tape and give you an hour without Googling it or whatever. I could give you an hour to think of the most random person that you could think of that would come out and make the save for fucking J.J. Dillon. And I guarantee, no matter how random you get, you would not guess this. Cindy, who made the save for J.J. fucking Dillon in this angle and attacked the Harris twins?
Why do I hear Metallica?
No, you didn't hear Metallica.
It's the Sandman!
The fucking Sandman. Yes, the Sandman. Jim Fullington, the next to last ECW champion. The guy who hadn't been seen on national television since the last ECW pay-per-view when he won and then lost the ECW title belt. That Sandman. He came out to make the save for J.J. Dillon. And after making the save, people remember when Sandman was in the WWE version of ECW, that awful theme that they used for him because WWE wasn't going to pay for Metallica. Oh well, I don't know what was better, but TNA had a horrifically bad ripoff of Enter Sandman here too.
Dale Oliver is clearly not earning his money.
I can't believe that this was the best that Dale Oliver could do here. I don't know. It was random, and this whole thing was just something. So we now have the Sandman in representing the NWA. Because yeah, he was wearing a TNA tradition shirt. So yeah, on the babyface side now, in addition to Jerry Lynn and Ron Killings and America's Most Wanted, is the Sandman. Okay.
Also an ECW connection because Harris is wearing ECW for a spell.
I mean, the heresies were everywhere. Oh well. But yeah, they didn't say this, but you could almost like if you wanted to try to make this make sense, and this is a real like you're really haven't gone a fucking limb to draw these two dots together. You could say that the Sandman had his run in WCW, and you could say that J.J. Dillon brought him into WCW,
Mm-hmm.
which is a real stretch to connect those dots. But if you wanted to, that's the best you're getting.
Because
So
wasn't
then
it
we get
Raven that vouched for him
Mhm.
for WCW?
in storyline. Oh my God, we got the fucking Raven. But anyway, after Tenay tells us that Jeff Jarrett's not here this week, we get a video package of that horribly mistimed double pin last week. And we're informed, of course, that the tag team titles were stripped. And so we're going to have a tournament, a 4-team tournament. And we're going to have the first round matches on this show. They didn't say this, but I'm assuming the finals next week. And then the winners of the tournament will wrestle Triple X after that. And the winners of that match will be the tag team champions. Okay, then. Then we go to our first match, America's Most Wanted versus the Rock and Roll Express. All right. So I'm going to list the following positives of this tag team tournament. First of all, it's a tournament. They remember that this show airs more than just 1 week at it, and that's it. They remember there's a show next week that they could have matches on too. Secondly, every team in this tournament has actually been together on this show and have won matches on this show. Sure, the Rock and Roll Express has only won one match, but remember like Apollo and Buff Bagwell? They were a team in the first tag team title tournament, never been a
good
team on
Lord.
this show. Remember that tag team gauntlet in September, the one that AMW won the belts at, when there were like
Yeah.
10 teams and 5 of them had never teamed before on the show? You know?
Mhm.
So, hey, we're going to have 5 teams in this tournament, including Triple X, and every single one of them had picked up a win at some point on this show. And sure, one of them is the Rock and Roll Express, who, let's be honest, should not have won the one match they won, but they won. So that, hey, you know what? They won. AMW are 2-time champions, so we'll call this something of a win here. This stupid tournament. So of course, much like the last time they wrestled, Chris Harris played Ricky Morton while being beaten down by Ricky Morton. The match was still rough. AMW did the double drop kick as a tribute to the Rock and Roll Express, and I had to laugh because just like the Rock and Roll Express, they didn't really get up for it either, and it was a double drop kick to the stomach. And then Chris Harris pinned Ricky Morton with a perfect plex, which was a tribute to his friend Kurt Hennig, of course. And I have to ask you something. And this may have been why I was thinking of Trey, because this seems like a joke that he would enjoy a lot more than you do. But we'll see how you react. But I think I know how you'll react. Anyway, considering how Kurt Hennig died, wouldn't it have been a better tribute to Kurt Hennig if Chris Harris would have snorted cocaine?
So after the match, after about
You
5 or so seconds of celebrating,
You reacted about as well as I expected you to.
yep. So after celebrating, the only member of Triple X who's not in Japan at this moment, Loki has his tag title belt and brings both members of AEW of it, saying, "This is mine, and nobody's going to take it." Well,
By the way,
see
how
about that.
how the hell did he even get the title belts anyway? Scott Armstrong took them from them last week and ran away with them.
Maybe he bought it at a shop somewhere. I don't know.
Uh-huh. So Scott Armstrong is selling the title belts now? Anyway, I gave this match a 2.5 out of 10.
I gave it a 4. It was fine. I'm not as
To the
much of a
back,
hard ass in
where
professional wrestling as you are.
to the back where we get the first of about 85 clips of wrestlers standing outside for some reason. Vince Russo is standing outside waiting for Raven. Raven just showed up 20 minutes into the show, and Russo is bitching about the Sandman. Now, if you're Raven and you're, doing this in kayfabe, you just showed up to the show 20 minutes late, and the guy who leads your stable is just ranting about the Sandman. At this point, I'd probably get in my car and turn around and go home. And so while Raven was trying to figure out what the hell was going on, Sandman ran in from out of nowhere and beat up Raven with a stick. But Raven got away and locked himself in the SCX locker room. I point out that Russo wouldn't shut up about how Sandman is Raven's friend. And I'm like, when the hell did that happen? Because I had forgotten the awful skits where Jim came to Raven's house in WCW to cheer him up. But yeah, even then, I don't think anybody in the world would ever say that Raven and the Sandman were friends.
No.
Also, last week we mentioned that SCX padlocked the baby faces in the SCX locker room. A, how the hell did they get out? And B, why doesn't anybody lock Russo in there so we don't have to see him 15 times a show? Because remember when they did that thing with Ken Shamrock when he locked somebody in a room and put the iron brick in front of the door? Then it turned out that there was another door on the other side. Like, we've seen the inside of this room. There's not a second door. Now, ignoring the fact that it's also a fire hazard to lock people into a room without another exit like that, ignoring that, why wouldn't you just lock them in there?
Because it's Tennessee. I mean, there's no rules in Tennessee if you think about it.
It is Tennessee after all. So what did you think about our random ass Raven Sandman angle here?
It was a thing that happened. And that's
by the way, remember last week when Raven and AJ Styles got into a fight? Why aren't Raven and AJ Styles wrestling tonight? Who cares, right? Because yeah, it gets better when we keep going here.
Oh yeah.
So the New Church, Brian Lee and Slash versus the Harrises in the other first round tag team title tournament match. Now, I don't know about you, but I should have used both sides of my brain, I guess, but I just assumed the New Church would win here and we get a, AMW New Church match next week. We can't have that because that, we can't have a good match. We can't do that, But of course, we get the giant brawl around the ring, which breaks down into a tag team match. Ron and Don got the heat on Slash by throwing a chair at him, which was supposed to be behind the referee's back. But this is TNA, so of course, the referee was looking right at him. The finish saw Low Ki, who's not on the show enough apparently, run down and distract Brian Lee, and the Harris twins pinned him with the H-bomb. I wrote this match is barely better than the opener, which featured two guys who were almost 50 and had been wrestling since the 70s and had gone through and had a lot harder life than people currently in wrestling who are near 50 or older. 3.0 out of 10.
Exactly what I gave it.
Yes. So during this match, they announced that next week, Jeff Jarrett will finally defend the NWA title. In this case, he'll finally defend it against AJ Styles. So I guess AJ finally asked for his title match. And Raven tonight, Raven is going to wrestle Sandman. Why, with all due respect to Sandman, why couldn't we have Raven and AJ Styles this week for a title shot at Jeff Jarrett next week? Because we're going to see AJ Styles is barely on this show. Jeff Jarrett is barely on this show. Neither of them cut promos on each other. Neither of them have a match where they win and, earn and like move forward. We just get announced the match. I was like, when the fuck was the last time AJ Styles? Okay, I'm sorry. He wrestled Larry Zbyszko 2 weeks in a row. Taking out
Yeah.
Larry Zbyszko, when was the last time AJ Styles had a match on this show? I think he wrestled The Truth in like December. Like, yeah, we can't have a show with AJ Styles on it, Low Ki on it, Jerry Lynn on it, and we can't just have them wrestling. I guess Jerry Lynn is wrestling every week, but until this week, who the fuck's he been wrestling? David Flair. You know, that because that's a great fucking idea.
Mm-hmm.
X Division champion Sonny Siaki with Desire versus Kid Cash with Trinity. Tenay says how much the NWA wishes they could get the X title back from SEX. And of course, if you had a referee who disqualified Siaki for things going on in front of his face, we would already have that. Now, I do believe this is only the second time Borash did his main event / Michael Buffer / UFC introductions for a title match. Because I think the only other time he did it was the Jeff Jarrett, Ron Killings title switch back in November. But this is one of those things that become a regular part of TNA. Which, by the way, they were doing because WWE was not doing this. Like WWE does it now, but they don't do it until WrestleMania 24, which is in 5 years. All right. So they fight outside the ring where Cash throws a chair at Sonny Siaki's head. However, Sonny Siaki, who I'm going to bet forgot the spot because he went right back fucking to it, Sonny Siaki ducked, and Kid Cash nearly took out the front row with the chair. Moments later, they just redid the damn spot again. Desire slammed Trinity back first into the guardrail. Cash successfully threw the chair at Siaki, so Siaki threw a chair back at him. Desire and Trinity were just running into the ring at will and just attacking, both people, while Don yelled at one point that the referee has no idea what's going on, even though he's watching them interfere liberally here. And then Cash wins the title with what was supposed to be a springboard moonsault. However, Kid Cash landed on top of his head and thankfully did appear to be okay because he covered Siaki to get the win and win the X Division title. Because, yes, we were too impatient to just wait a few weeks for Red to come back from Japan to have Red win, which has been planned for a month now. This could have and should have been a lot better. 4.0 out of 10.
I'm going to say a 5 out of 10. I mean, it was an average match. It should have been better, but I don't think Kid Cash is the right person to... I don't think he was good enough to be able to drag a good match out of Sonny Siaki at this point.
We saw them wrestle a few weeks ago in the mixed tag, and they had a fine half of the match. We talked about it a few times that those two were the best match on the show, but then the women had the worst match on the show, so it averaged out at a middle of the road match. But it's like, this was not that. This was not their night even before the finish. It just wasn't that good. Unfortunately, Desire and Trinity are rubbing off on them when it's coming to these bad matches things. And yeah, why we couldn't just wait, until Amazing Red came back in a few weeks to win the belt. I get they wanted to move Sonny Siaki out of the X Division because he's not an X Division wrestler, but they could have just not had him wrestle for a few weeks. They could have just had him cut promos. When the fuck was the last time Sonny Siaki cut a promo? They're taking away all the fun on this show because we used to like to talk about how Sonny Siaki would say Sonny Siaki 37 times on a show.
And
of course we can't have that. So up next, we had a segment allegedly called The Interrogation. It was Mike Tenay and Don West interviewing people off camera for a minute. And they called it The Interrogation, and then they showed a graphic that called it The Interrogators. And it was with Ron Killings. And it was basically a whole bunch of questions that would lead to Killings answering questions in like 2 words or less. And among the things he said, he called Vince McMahon an asshole. He said his favorite tag team partner was BG James. He doesn't have a favorite Harris twin because who the hell has a favorite Harris twin? He says Jeff Jarrett's a crazy guy. And then he told Tenay to fuck off because Tenay asked him if he wants to join SEX. So many moons ago,
worse than I remembered. But I want to talk about this segment.
The interrogators, or
afterwards.
Yeah.
So
they do the interrogators a few times, and I remember it being okay, but it could have been better. Anyway, tell us about the riveting promo that followed the interrogators.
So backstage, Goldie's talking with Tweedledee and Tweedledum of character operations for SEX, Sanders and Gilberti. And they talk about development and acquisitions and talk about what they could do with Goldilocks. Gilberti said he'd give her a makeover and put him in his bitch slap fashion as Camel Toe or Ku Klux Ann or something like that. And then they bring out this male hustler calendar for some odd reason.
But by the way, until they started giving them names, I thought it was a woman on the calendar because they did not really zoom in on the person on the calendar.
Right.
But it wasn't. It was a man.
Yeah. This was a rib on, I believe, what John Laurinaitis did with Divas at the time.
This was before that. This was years before that. So it wasn't even a rib on Laurinaitis. Because, like, Laurinaitis didn't start doing that until he signed Kelly Kelly and Alicia Fox. And that's not till, like, 2006.
So this is something Russo thought about doing.
This is shit because the Vince Russo crew, Mike Sanders, Disco Inferno, and all those guys, they would drive to the shows from Atlanta. And this is shit that, like, Disco Inferno would come up with in the back seat that Vince Russo would laugh at. And it's inside wrestling stories. Because, people have heard about the evil architect Bill Ding before. Like, that's where it comes from. It's Disco Inferno in the car with Vince Russo coming up with stupid, asinine stuff like this. But they put it on TV this time. And actually, there was a story last week in The Observer about how they were talking about having somebody film their car rides so they could try to, where they talk about all this stupid ass creative shit they come up with, so they could try to sell it to a TV network. Keep in mind, they're not even trying to sell TNA to a TV network, and they want to sell these dipshits, talking about bad creative ideas to a TV network. But yeah, in addition to the evil architect Bill Ding, he also talked about the Jew Tang Clan and the Connecticut Urban Nasty Thugs. Stop and think about that one for a second. It was so hilarious.
Thankfully,
it's not over because BG James walked in and told them that they should wrestle the black guy and Elvis while he fights Gimp Biscuit.
Yeah, I said the same thing.
Yeah. So then we get a match. It's a 6-man tag match. And you could probably figure out who everybody is based on the BG promo at the end there. But it's BG James, Mike Sanders, and Glenn Gilberti versus Ron Killings, Jorge Estrada, and Tenacious Z. And I had written, instead of Glenn Gilberti, I'd written David Flair. And to be honest, at this point, I don't know what would have been better. Because Glenn
This.
Gilberti is like a stopped, like I've mentioned, he's a decent worker, but he doesn't even give enough of a fuck anymore to be a decent worker. And so they get a 6-man tag here. And by the way, at this point, I was under the impression that Low Ki wasn't wrestling on the show. So we were having the Rock and Roll Express, the Harrisys, Jorge Estrada, Mike Sanders, and Glenn Gilberti in matches, while Low Ki is there and isn't wrestling. Maybe that's the fucking problem. So Jorge Estrada last week lost his Elvis suit and did not get it back this week. So he's out there in just his black tights. Tenay tries to defend, asking Truth about the SEX, but he's like, I had to ask him the question, and like Truth has told him the fucking answer about 17 times already. Tenay says that Tenacious D lost his age at the leg of 8 years old. I'm not messing that up when I say that. That's what Tenay said. This was fucking ridiculous. So you essentially have one team where you have two guys who could do an X Division match, one guy who can kind of work the X Division style if he needs to, and the other side you have two jokes and one guy, years past his prime. So yeah, this match is Vince Russo at its finest, and it's like essentially the match was fine despite that, because Jorge Estrada was actually on this week. Ron Killings did enough to keep the match out of negative star territory. And Truth pinned Sanders with a front suplex. Referee Scott Armstrong again interfered, because when all else fails, we now need the referees interfering too. And yeah, like I mentioned last week, BG James, Mike Sanders, and Disco Inferno are not the fucking people to be wrestling Zach Gowen. And we'll get to it later, but there were better alternatives on what they could have done on this show. But I somehow gave this a 4.0 out of 10. I think I was drunk.
I thought it was nice, I guess. And I essentially gave it a 3. So outside, right. Raven is with Goldilocks, because of course. And Raven's wondering why Sandman wants revenge on him, besides the fact that he took his wife and his kid.
Oh my god.
During the interview...
First of all, we mentioned last week that Russo only has ideas from 6 years ago. Raven and Sandman was 7 years ago at this point. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, but they've been feuding for the past 7 years.
Now, they feuded for like 1 year, and then Raven left, and went to WCW and then WWE. And like, I guess he was in ECW for a year, but like, yeah, whatever. So
no, they also feuded in WCW.
For that 1 month. Yep.
So AJ pulls up and he beats down Raven. And they get separated.
Oh, not quite. You missed something.
Oh, Raven telling AJ. Oh, here's AJ trying to get out of a car.
Yes, AJ couldn't get out of the fucking car. And AJ Styles, who is not a large man, this was not a small car. I don't know if he just couldn't get the seatbelt undone or what. I guess if that is the case, kudos to AJ Styles for wearing a seatbelt. But yeah, eventually AJ gets out, slams Raven's head into the wall, and then the camera moves 10 feet away where the Rock and Roll Express are laying on the ground. And it's not because they OD'd.
No, they got beat down, and this rates them off.
Yes. And I'm sure no one can figure out, why they were or how they got beaten down. But that is a mystery, you see, until later. Remember the interrogator segment we had? Remember we said it wasn't that good? Well, David Flair cut a promo next with Mike Tenay, a pre-taped video with David Flair. Now, a few things. I'm pretty sure David Flair had a cold because he kept, doing the to clear his nose thing throughout the entire match, throughout the entire interview. Either that, or he was on something, or maybe both. He talked about Arn Anderson, Vince Russo, Stacy Keibler, and Ric Flair. And a few weeks ago, we talked about all the things David Flair can't do in the ring. He can't throw a chop. He can't move. He can't run the ropes. He can't sell. He can't do anything. And now we know he can't cut a promo either. I'm not sure what David Flair can do, but I don't know. Hopefully we find out one day, because this is not the end of David Flair in TNA.
No, it's not. And I don't know if it gets worse, but it doesn't get much better.
Like, literally, why did this have to air? Like, they literally could have just not aired this, and the world would not have cried. And then this segment ends a similar way as the last Mike Tenay interview segment ended. Mike Tenay asked a question that the other guy didn't want to answer, and they got up and leave. This time, and yes, by the way, I said leave, not left. This time, Mike Tenay asked about David Flair's sack, and David Flair didn't want to answer questions about his sack, and he left. Okay, then. Then it was time for something weird. And this was weird in a good-ish way, because for absolutely no reason, Low Ki came to the ring to wrestle Steve Corino. Low Ki came out to the ring to wrestle Steve Corino here on this NWA TNA show on February 12th, 2003. I honestly was fucking speechless, because again, this is just so out of the blue. Like, we thought Sandman coming out here earlier was random, but like, even that, you could say, oh well, he's a surprise. Of course, you're not going to announce that the Sandman is here because he's a surprise. Steve Corino is in a scheduled match, so this is not a surprise. And at no point during this show, unless maybe I got bumped in the head and zonked out for a second, did they mention that Steve Corino was going to be wrestling on this show at all?
No. This was supposed to be a surprise for Low Ki.
Are you sure?
I guess. I mean, it's the only explanation I could think of.
I was under the impression that this was a scheduled match that Low Ki would have been aware of. And Steve Corino cut a backstage promo talking about how this is not the Low Ki he knew that he goes to Japan with every other week, because he thought he knew him, and then Low Ki went and joined SEX. And then, because I don't fucking know, this is becoming a bingo game of, the Abyss theme bingo card. Who all is using Abyss's theme? Steve Corino is one of them. Okay. So who we got now? Obviously Abyss. Steve Corino. Ace Steel used it. Monty Brown used it. Who else used it? Did Jason Cross use it?
No, he didn't use. Jason Cross did not use it.
Okay, but somebody else did use it, because somebody used it in like December. Anyway, either way, Steve Corino is the 5th person on this show to use the theme song that becomes Abyss's theme song. It's honestly at this point hilarious. Like, I get, like, people go back, you watch Nitro, and like Eddie Guerrero used to use the theme song that Juventud Guerrera ended up using, and Pat Tanaka came out to Bill Goldberg's theme at one point on Nitro. And like it's those funny things that are like, oh yeah, it's WCW, they're using theme songs. So I remember somebody in like '96 used the theme song that Stunning Steve Austin had. It was like, yeah,
Marty Jannetty used it.
yes, Marty Jannetty used Stunning Steve Austin's theme song. So yeah, it's one of those things. It's like they reuse theme songs. TNA is not even a year old. We've had 4 people use the same theme song. And it's not even the person who makes that theme song famous.
Mm-hmm.
Famous being an operative word, of course, but you know what I mean.
Or it's more
So
synonymous.
So a minute into the match, Low Ki kicked the referee in the ankles, and referee Scott Armstrong stood up from the ankle kick and pointed at his shirt. And Low Ki used the shirt pointing to get the heat. And I'm like, this I think is the best match we've seen in a month at this point. Although
that's not even a debate.
It's faint praise, but like, yeah, best match we've seen in a month, and it would have even been better if we had an actual finish. But Low Ki raked the referee's eyes and got disqualified. Because apparently you can only attack the referee once. Because yeah, the story of TNA forever will be bad finishes, but at least this time we got a good match to go with the bad finish. If I was a betting person, because I know that Steve Corino, especially in his post, his post ECW run, he had issues with doing jobs, because he was contracted to 01, and that his boss Shinya Hashimoto wouldn't want him doing jobs in the US to people who weren't worthy. But I think isn't Low Ki in 01, or I don't know what promotion Low
All
Ki is
Japan.
in. And okay, so maybe that was it, because technically you had All Japan versus 01, and so politically you couldn't have a finish, but this was a pretty weak fucking finish. And that's essentially what happened here. Because actually there's a story that Steve Corino told in a shoot interview that he got booked on an indie show against Buff Bagwell, and he's trying to tell the promoter in advance, it's like, Buff Bagwell's not going to want to do a job, and I can't do a job. And the match was just exactly what it sounded like, and that's what happened here. So yeah, I think it's amazing, like with all this talent, even if Vince Russo was the one that said, okay, bro, because I don't even know how the hell it happened. It just came out of the blue. Low Ki randomly raked Scott Armstrong's eyes. So even if that was Vince Russo's idea, you're telling me Low Ki and Steve Corino couldn't say, you know what? What if we did this instead? Because I bet they probably could have figured out something better. But oh well. 7.0 out of 10. Could have been better, should have been better, but finish.
Yep, ding, 7. Really solid match. And then the post kind of sees Low Ki try to get their comeuppance on Low Ki, but he's just too fast because AMW comes out and chases them off.
And then they stare down with the disciples of the new church.
And he just bails.
Well,
and locks himself in the SEX locker room.
I mean, hey, I don't know about you, but if 4 guys came running after me, especially 4 guys who were all much bigger than me, I'd run in the opposite direction too. So then we go back to the back where Jerry Lynn tells Goldilocks he's going to give Vince Russo props for doing what he said, because Vince Russo basically said he was here to kill the company, and that's what he's been doing. And Jerry Lynn has decided that he himself is going to build back up the X Division. And so the best way to build back up the X Division is an 8-way gauntlet match. Everyone got introduced. There are no tags. It's a gauntlet match, a real gauntlet match, not the TNA Royal Rumble gauntlet match way, but an actual, 7 falls, because we have 8 matches here. And it's Shark Boy, Jose Maximo, Joel Maximo, Jimmy Rave, Tony Mamaluke, David Young, Jerry Lynn, and the debuting Paul London. Now, two things. First, the winner of this match is going to get an X Division title match next week. Actually, did they say next week? Either way, the winner is going to get an X Division title match. And so what we could have done, because remember that weird ass 6-man tag we had earlier that I said there were better things you could do with everybody?
Mm-hmm.
What Vince Russo could have done, because he's such a fucking genius, is do a segment, do an angle with BG James, Mike Sanders, Glenn Gilberti, and Ron Killings. You move forward their angle and move on with your fucking life. That's what you could do with those four. Take the other two and stick them with the 6 people in this match who are not Paul London and Jerry Lynn, and have a fun X Division 8-man tag. Do a bunch of dives. Zach Gowen, it's the big star move, because that's the whole one of that 6-man tag was Zach Gowen was supposed to do cool moves and get himself over. But you do an 8-man tag, everyone does a whole bunch of dives, and it's a fun little X Division match. And, you put Zach Gowen over as the big future X Division guy and yada, yada, yada. And then you take Jerry Lynn and Paul London and you give them 10, 12, 13 minutes, and it's the winner gets an X Division title match. And you have Jerry Lynn versus Paul London for 10, 12, 13 minutes. And immediately you take this show from having one good match with this and one match with that 6-man tag to two good to great matches. And suddenly this show goes from another drag that we have to drag ourselves to get through to a damn good little show that I'm happy I wasted my life watching. But nope. Instead, we needed to eliminate 6 people in like 5 minutes. Shark Boy pins Jose and then Joel with the Dead Sea Drop. Jimmy Rave pins Shark Boy with the Michinoku Driver. Tony Mamaluke pins Jimmy Rave with a back suplex. David Young pins Tony Mamaluke with a spine buster. And then Jerry Lynn, Jerry Lynn tapped him out with an STF. So after 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes, we've eliminated everybody else and came down to Jerry Lynn versus Paul London, where they had an abbreviated version of the match that they could have had. We just gave them the time on their own. And we had an actual fun little match with Jerry Lynn and Paul London. And the finish sees London go for the shooting star press. Jerry Lynn gets his knees up, and then Lynn pins him with a cradle pile driver. 6.5 out of 10, almost entirely due to the greatness of Paul London and Jerry Lynn.
I give it a 7 out of 10. I thought this was a really good match. I didn't mind the conveyor belt eliminations, because we've seen that before.
That doesn't mean it's a good. That doesn't mean it's good. Like, it's one thing if you did an 8-man gauntlet match and you gave them 20 to 25 minutes, because this doesn't get anybody over. Did Shark Boy get over because he beat 2 guys? No, because he then immediately got beat himself. It did nothing for the SAT, and we'll talk about the post-match here in a second, but it did nothing for the SAT. It did nothing for Jimmy Rave, who we've seen a couple times on the show. Tony Mamaluke got nothing out of it. David Young, who had been winning, on the show before, got nothing out of this. And eventually it ended up with them having 6-0 matches to give us the one good 6 or 7 minutes with Jerry Lynn and Paul London. Like, literally, like you couldn't have taken the fucking 6-man. I really hate that fucking 6-man tag. You could have taken that 6-man tag out and you wanted this fucking 8-way gauntlet, fine. Take the 6 or 7 or 8 minutes that 6-man tag had and add it to this so everyone got a little bit of time. Because that's how a match gets over. That's how a match builds. This is just we're wasting everyone's fucking time and just, wasting the lives of everybody. Because half of these guys were also in dark matches before the show began. So it's not like, oh, well, we brought them in and we have to use them. We did use them. And by the way, Paul London, don't get too attached to the poor bastard. Because, after next week, he doesn't come back until May. And even then, he comes back for a couple matches in May and June, and that's it. Because he's going to be in WWE relatively soon.
Mm-hmm.
6.5 out of 10. After the match, because again, we can't just have a match, somebody wins, and then walks off. We can't do that in Vince Russo's world. Konnan comes down. Oh, yeah, because first all the losers came to the ring and celebrated with Jerry Lynn. Konnan comes down and he tells off Jerry Lynn because he's white and he's doing luchador type moves and isn't just kicking people in the leg. I'm paraphrasing. That's basically what happened. And then Konnan found the first two people to join his stable. And the two people that joined his stable are the two biggest losers of the match, Jose and Joel Maximo, who were the first two people eliminated on this show. And so Konnan and the SAT beat down everybody. They go to leave, and Vince Russo cuts them off and demand to know what side Konnan is on. Konnan tells him he doesn't owe him shit and leaves. Because again, we cannot just have a winner and a loser and move on with our fucking lives. That is too much. It's too easy, you see.
Yeah.
So to the back, where Jorge Estrada now says he's flying solo. Keep in mind, he's been flying solo since October. Truth then barged in and told everyone to fuck off before leaving. And when they left, as Goldilocks followed him, because why not, they stumbled across Mike Sanders and Glenn Gilberti, who are unconscious outside the ring. Outside the arena. Sadly, this was not a loser leaves town backstage assault. And then, despite the fact that we've essentially promised two other matches on the show, an X-title match and a tag team tournament final, the only match actually announced for next week, Jeff Jarrett versus AJ Styles for the NWA title. Again, two people who neither cut promos, neither had a match. One did an angle, and one, quote-unquote, isn't here. And that brings us to our main event. Again, these shows, at the very least, the last couple of weeks have gone relatively quickly. We got our main event, Raven versus the Sandman in a Falls Count Anywhere match. In the first time, we talked about them feuding all over the place for different reasons. This is the first time they ever main evented a pay-per-view. And I'm pretty sure it's probably the last. But the match starts with 11 minutes of pay-per-view time left, so no, this is not going very long. They have an abbreviated version of every hardcore match you've ever seen. I'd say it's the abbreviated version of every Raven Sandman match you've ever seen, except if this was an ECW Raven Sandman match, Raven would have about 14 lackeys running in at some point. They fight around the area. They go over by one of the entrances to the arena, and they have a table set up. Sandman climbs up the set of steps to dive off of it onto Raven, but Low Ki shows up and shoves Sandman off, and Sandman, who, if nothing else, has no issue taking some wacky bumps and always looks kind of interesting while doing them, falls through the table. Raven pins him to pick up the win. Again, by the way, you know what I also remember during this match? This is Raven's first TNA match. Raven, who's been here for like a month, this is his first match. And again, this is why no one ever brings up anything he did between the debut where he attacks Jarrett and the title match. which, by the way, is still 2 months away. And so Raven wins, and again, I must have been feeling quite generous because I gave this match a 4.0 out of 10.
I gave it a 4.0 as well. I mean, hardcore matches, to me, I'm ambivalent to. Like, violence for the sake of violence doesn't do anything for me. So I thought it was fine. And hey, guess what? How about some build?
Well, Steve Corino runs down and attacks Low Ki, and then Sandman, who just crashed and burned, came to the ring. So we had a 4-way brawl. Russo and SEX all come down. They tie Corino and Sandman up just like last week, and were threatening to whip them like a dog. And Superman returned because we all were surprised that Jeff Jarrett was actually here at the building. Jeff Jarrett takes out 7 people with a kendo stick, and only after he takes out 7 people did the New Church run in for the save and to help out. Finally, AJ Styles runs in for the only build to next week's world title match as he gives Jeff Jarrett a Styles Clash on the chair, and that is how the show goes off the air this week. Yay.
It was an adequate show.
On the TNA scale, it was almost downright good, but using the real scale, well, match quality 4.43. So yeah, matches were a little bit better than they have in the last few weeks. Overall enjoyment, 5.5 out of 10, because who would have thought that keeping the worst of the stuff to the first hour and then ending the show with, by comparison, better stuff would lead to a more enjoyable experience. Of course, the so and so isn't here this week trope is long since gotten old, and there is not a human being in the world who did not know that Jeff Jarrett was going to come in at the end here. Future build, 2.0 out of 10. And that's just because, hey, we actually got a match that had been building up for a while announced for next week, even though neither man cut a promo. We didn't even get a history video because, yeah, fine. You want to be like, oh, man, they didn't have to have AJ cut a promo. They didn't have to have Jarrett cut a promo. Fine, whatever. Where's the video package? They could have had a video package saying, oh, yeah, remember how these two have been feuding for 2 months? Let's have it right here and remind you of it to build to next week's match. Now we couldn't have that. Overall ratings, 3.98, which still better than it's been for like a month now.
I gave it like a 5 out of 10. I thought it was a fair, mediocre show. I think we didn't need to remind everybody, but we should, that my scale is a bit different than your scale. I'm more lenient than you are. But anyway,
this
I am just glad this is over.
This is the 32nd pay-per-view. I think they do 111 of these. So at least at that point, with that, we're down to less than 80. Let me see if I can find out here. They did, well, there's some debate on the count because I'm showing 110. I think it's 111, 112. Either way, we're at less than 80.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so hooray for that. You know. All right.
And
so
I know what happens next week. I want to tell people, Ari has had some great rants over the past few weeks. It's my turn to rant next week.
Yippee. I can't wait. But
the sincerity is just dripping off of you right now.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. Before we go, you want to have anything else you want to talk about?
No.
All right. So that does it for this week. Thank you all for listening. Hope you all enjoyed the show. And we'll talk to you again in 7 days.